Building self-driving car has been the dream of my life, and I've dedicated more than 10 years to it. If we can build a safer car, we would save a lot of lives. But on top of it, it's transformational. Just imagine, instead of owning a car, you have a little phone and you summon a car, and an empty car comes to you. You just jump in and lets you go somewhere, and when you don't need it anymore, it disappears. There is an enormous market for self-driving car engineers. Lots and lots of companies that you wouldn't suspect have entered that field and are massively hiring. I challenge everybody here to be part of this. We're launching at Udacity a nano-degree program called Self-Driving Cars so that everyone in the world can become a self-driving car engineer. Welcome. My name is Sebastian Thwan. Welcome to the fourth in a series of Udacity Talks. I have the unbelievable pleasure to have a great artist, a great technologist, and a super creative person here in Silicon Valley with me, Darnell.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great having you. Eric runs, or is a chief creative officer for a company called Baobab Studios, formerly known from DreamWorks. And I have to ask you, are you a creative, a technologist, a content person, a cook, or a comedian?
I've basically been a content person. That's where my career has skewed. I mean, I started back in computer animation in the days when everybody had to do some coding. But coding is behind me, and now it's all about storytelling.
Coding is behind you. Yeah. But you're very well known for a whole bunch of critters, right? Like little bunnies coming in invaders, Antz, Madagascar. Yep. Mm-hmm. You have an announcement to make, I hear.
Yeah, in fact, Invasion, which is our first short, which features this little bunny, that we haven't quite decided the name, but I think I'm just going to say that her name is Zoe.
Zoe?
Yeah, we had a vote around the office and Zoe won. And the Invasion piece, which has been out there in kind of sneak peek form, its final version with Ethan Hawke doing the narration is going to be released tomorrow on the Oculus headset as well as the Gear VR. So for us, it's time to pop some champagne tomorrow at the office, and we're pretty excited.
Yeah. We've invited Eric because he's unbelievably creative, and I'm a big admirer of his work, and a great pleasure having you here. But also because we at Udacity are launching a virtual reality nano-degree. And there's a paradigm shift, I think, and I want to ask you in a second about this, between the classical 2D movie, and then we had the 3D movie, kind of, didn't really work that well, but somewhat. But now we're going to have the movie where you don't even know where to look. Like if you look in the wrong direction, you might actually miss the story. The VR movie, the fully immersed movie. Why do we do this? And why are you inspired about this?
Well, what got me excited about virtual reality was when I put my first headset on. And it was the Gear VR, which works with the phone, so it wasn't even the high-tech one. But it's one of those things, and you've probably heard it before, but until you put one on, you don't really know what people are talking about. But as soon as I put one on, I knew this was the next thing, and I needed to find a way to get involved in it.
I just got my Oculus Rift yesterday, and I almost missed my first meeting this morning. Was sitting there, Minecraft, looking around. A different story. But so, do you think in 20 years we're all going to sit around in cinemas and take these things and look in random directions? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. Well, 20 years is the singularity, I think. like 2045. So
it might not exist anymore. But
if
just
our
before we go away.
Overloads are benign. Then
Just before we go away.
Well, you know, it's hard to predict because technology tends to move faster and faster. And who knows where we'll be? I mean, I would not be surprised if we had the equivalent of the holodeck in 20 years. The technology is already improving, and it's going to get better and better. Headsets now, I think we'll be laughing a little bit about the people with the bricks on their faces. You know, that stuff is going to go away, and it's going to become
pieces, right?
Yeah, and very short-lived in the real world, I think, because the technology, I think, will just improve in leaps and bounds. And it's hard to predict, but in my lifetime, I'm sure that there'll be a holodeck for everybody.
Nice. So when new media get introduced, like we move from, say, theater to film. The first full feature film were like these literal shots of a screen of a theater play with curtains and everything, and people hadn't quite discovered you can move the camera or you can compose a movie out of multiple pieces or special effects and all this stuff. What's going to happen in VR movies that'll be different from regular movies?
Well, it really is a different medium. It's not just an extension of cinema. And you know that when you put a headset on and you get into this immersive world that not only engages your intellect and your emotions, but like engages your reptile brain. You know, there are things like you put me on the edge of a building in virtual reality, and I'm afraid of heights. Not only is it going to be difficult for me to look down, but there is no way I can force my leg to take a step forward, even though I know there's going to be another carpeted tile beneath my feet. I cannot do it. It's very, very immersive in that way. And so it's a very different experience. But what I'm excited about is, just like film and theater and literature, all, for the most part, try to focus on having a great story and telling it well with characters that we can fall in love with. They do it in very different ways, and they have very different tool sets. And so I think that there's a huge potential for virtual reality to do some of the same things that cinema and theater can do in the way that they engage the human emotional response and make you cry and make you laugh and make you care about characters. And I think in VR we have the potential to do that in a way that's more profound than any other medium. But to do that, we have a very different toolkit, just like cinema has their different toolkit than books or theater. And now is the time when we're discovering what are the tools in that black box that we haven't discovered yet. And there's a big job ahead of us figuring that out, because nobody knows right now.
It strikes me as really tricky, because I might look in the direction and I might miss the scene because I looked somewhere else. And how do you focus people's attention? Have you worked on this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge consideration for us, particularly because we're often not waiting for, we don't want to wait for the viewer. We want the viewer to be looking where we want them to look when we want them to look there, and yet have it feel like it's their free choice. It is their free choice, but do things that whatever we can do to attract them. Because for a storyteller, one of the things that's really important is like rhythm and pacing and ultimately structure.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I think games, I love video games, computer games, gaming in VR is like a match made in heaven. That's going to be huge. But the one thing that games, for me at least, have always struggled with is like they have some story, they're building up to some cathartic moment, and then you stop and you kill zombies and you lose all your momentum.
And you give the viewer a choice, god damn it, so you can influence the story, right? You'd rather have him slavishly focused on this game.
Right, and you know, for me, it's hard enough to tell a good story anyway. You know, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And so the idea of like having like multiple branching stories, that's when the quality starts to really take a nosedive. So at Baobab Studios, what we're trying to do is find the tools that we can use to have a great story and tell it well and have characters that audiences fall in love with, and do it in the context where the viewer is a part of the story, where they feel like they're right there, where they're motivated to take action, but action that helps take the story forward in a real specific way, in a way that we've sort of pre-designed for the viewer.
That's great. My family and I love your past movies. I can't wait until tomorrow to see Invasion, and I recommend everybody else to really check it out. Let me go back in time. So you were born in Kansas.
Yes.
What do you do in Kansas?
You
in
know,
the
it was
first
a
10
very.
years or 20 years?
It was just
I remember driving through and the streets had like letters as names because like A Street, B Street, C Street.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Prairie Village, Kansas,
Good.
of all places. It's actually a suburb of Kansas City, and it's very much like a suburb you find anywhere in the country. And you know, I think the one thing that you don't really have a lot of in Kansas is a lot of, at least when I was growing up, is a lot of examples of things that you can do that are outside of the norm. You know, there's not a lot of startups in Kansas City compared to, say, although I'm sure there are a lot more now than there were when I was there. You know, you think, well, I'm going to be in business, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, but you don't necessarily.
So startup is like a new pizza shop.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But you don't think of things like I'm going to be a VR content creator, or even I'm going to be a filmmaker. You have to have a real sort of far-reaching vision, or a farther-reaching vision than you do if you're living in areas where there's all that kind of stuff going on. So I didn't have any idea that I'd be doing this when I was back there. I went to college to become a doctor.
Oh, a doctor, a medical doctor.
Medical doctor. And then that slowly changed when I realized that
Not an
I can't just do a profession because I tend to get good grades in it, you know. I realized I didn't love it, especially when I got to organic chemistry and my grades started to tumble. But I ended up getting a degree in broadcast journalism as an undergrad.
And then you were the funniest man on the planet for a while?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, in junior high, I don't know where you found that out. In junior high, I was voted Mr. Humor, I think. I don't even remember what those days were like. It's too far back. You don't know what for. But I was really interested in the imagery that we were using in broadcast journalism. And all of my classmates were interested in being on TV and being the guy, and that's the news.
Yeah.
And so I had to go to the film school to find people that knew about that and could teach me that. And then by the time I graduated with my journalism degree, I wanted to go on and become an avant-garde filmmaker and live in a mud hut my whole life. And
I see.
That's
Did
how
you
I began.
For a while? Did you live in a mud hut?
Essentially. I did construction and waited tables for about 5 years until I had enough material together to apply to art school.
I see. And then eventually you made it to a DreamWorks, I guess?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, I studied experimental animation at CalArts as a master's degree, and at that time computers were experimental, but because of my science background I was very interested in that, and programming didn't scare me, and
there was no chemistry involved.
no organic chemistry, which is some other art form. And then when I got out of school, I managed to get an internship at Pacific Data Images, which in 1991 was the oldest computer animation company in existence, and worked there for a few years, and eventually DreamWorks partnered with Pacific Data Images to create their first feature animated film that came out of DreamWorks, and I was selected to direct the film along with my partner Tim Johnson, another nice. PDR veteran. And we didn't deserve the job, but nobody else had directed a computer animated film except John Lasseter, and he was busy, so we lucked into that job, and I've was doing it for the next 20 years.
And you love storytelling. I know I can't ask you to act a script that you haven't disclosed to the public yet, but you also do a special role or job in acting out scripts, right?
Do what?
A special job in acting scripts where you become all the characters at the same time?
Well, it's important as a director to be able to communicate a performance. Right. So yeah, you do sometimes act out, both physically and verbally, like what characters need to do in a script, the facial performance, and it's a big part of communicating with animators. It's also a big part of when we're going and pitching our ideas to people that might potentially get involved in one way or the other, to be able to sit with a group of people and tell a story in a way that's compelling and can help them visualize that story enough that they want to get involved, even though all we have is me like telling them a story. Basically, it's just it's something that takes a lot of practice, and for me at least it does. And I spend hours and hours practicing my pitches so that when I get into a room full of people that I don't know, that it's relatively natural.
That is good. In fact, there's a lesson in for all our students who want to have jobs. Practice your interviews and just go walk up and down and speak to yourself. Makes a huge difference. Don't just sit in front of a paper. Exactly.
I heard Yo-Yo Ma was on the radio.
Famous cellist.
Yeah, the great cellist. And somebody, a girl in the audience, a young girl, raised her hand and said, I'm a music student. He said, oh, well, that's fantastic. And she said, but I can't wait till I'm like you. And he said, well, what do you mean? Well, now that you're so amazing and so accomplished, you just don't have to practice anymore. And he said, actually, I practice 5 hours a day, and if I don't, I start to get bad really fast.
Yeah.
And so anybody that makes things look effortless in the arts is only doing it because they
I can tell you, I mean, as a formerly tenured professor, you get to certain jobs where you just don't have to practice anymore. You can happily wait your life out, but it's true for everybody else. We have to practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have questions by our students. Oh, before I do this, one last question that I want to ask. So you created a movie studio not in Los Angeles or in Burbank or Hollywood, but in Silicon Valley. Why?
Well, for one, we're not making movies. We're making virtual reality experiences. And there's a lot of people up in this area that know how to do feature film, computer animated films, because places like Pixar and ILM and DreamWorks. And there's a lot of people that know how to do real-time rendering, which is a big part of what VR can be, is running on a big computer and getting those images out 11 frames. I'm sorry, 1 frame every 11 milliseconds, twice for each eye. And so if you want to get that quality of a feature film and you want to render those frames, that quickly, you need a lot of really specialized technical talent as well. So for us, it makes a great deal of sense. And I don't think it really matters where you are, certainly right now, as long as you've got the right mix of business and creative skill and technical skill, and we just found that we had that up here.
So many of our students will be technical, and our VR nano degree that's going to launch soon will teach them the skills of the trade. But from your perspective, if there's things that people should focus on and discover, what are the big open questions in virtual reality experiences?
Well, even though I say we want to have kind of a linear story and tell it with a certain rhythm and structure, interactivity is still really critical. And the phones that we have are actually pretty powerful. When you consider they're about as powerful as a PlayStation 1. But again,
or a crazy supercomputer, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
30 years ago.
Exactly. But it's still really, really hard, to do anything in real time. On a phone. And so you have to make creative choices, and then you also have to make technical choices about, what kind of interactivity can you get in? How much can you pump through that skinny little pipe? But those are the kinds of things that are going to really bring the audience in. And I underestimated how powerful some of the interactive components really could be. This word empathy gets passed around in the VR world, and like this is the medium of empathy, and I was kind of skeptical. But then when we did our little short where this little bunny hops out of the trees and spots you across this frozen lake and hops over to you and looks you in the eye and makes eye contact, people really responded to that in an emotional, powerful way, and I think it's simply because this is a character that recognizes that you are in her world and actually reacts and responds to that fact, and you just don't really get it at that level in pretty much any other medium, and people were just delighted by that. And when the little guy suddenly starts wanting to play with you, people would jump around and mimic her body language.
Oh. And so you see the first set of home accidents that people fall off windows.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then there's a point where the bunny runs and hides behind you. Nice. And people were, some people described, and she's hiding from these aliens that are pointing their weapons at you, and you're almost working as a shield for her. And a lot of people said, I just felt this weird surge of I wanted to protect the bunny, or one guy said, I wanted to watch the aliens, but I knew the bunny was behind me, and I could feel her presence. Even though I know I was standing in your office, it's like I could feel her breath on the back of my neck.
So you put the audience straight into the center.
Yeah, so there's just some really powerful things that you can do. And the more interactive the characters can be with the viewer, the more they'll suspend their disbelief and accept the fact that they're a part of that world.
Feels like one thing to invent now is a bodysuit that shakes and breathes at you as you watch one of these movies or these experiences.
But there's tons of stuff for technically. There are no VR authoring tools right now. Yeah. Somebody's going to write the stuff that eventually every VR studio will probably want to use because it'll help them so much. There's pipelines. There's just a lot of tech challenges out there.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful time to be here today. And I want to remind all of our students, I mean, the things that we take for granted today, like the cell phone is not even saying 10 years old, and Twitter and Facebook just about 10 years, and self-driving cars have just been invented recently. So in 10 years' time, you might all be deeply immersed. There's also some companies that have see-through displays. They can see stuff and then using mixed with real reality, called augmented reality. A lot of opportunities, a lot of jobs here in Silicon Valley. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to start with Maria. And here's a very simple question, and I just pass it on. How did the idea of virtual reality animation really start? What's the historical origin?
Well, it's been around for a long time. At PDI back in the early 90s, there were a couple of the technical guys that actually rigged a couple of giant, at that time they were the smallest monitors you could get, on this big heavy headset, and you would sit in a wheelchair, and they'd strap a silicon graphics computer into a backpack behind you, and there are all these cables, and
this is how the first version of Google Glass looked like, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Very first version.
So there was excitement and interest, and the idea and the imagination for virtual reality has been around for 30 years or more. And probably more than that, at least in the science fiction literature, I'm sure. But it really, there's a big difference between having the idea and making it a reality.
So Zuckerberg kind of the first person who, like with Oculus Rift, who kicked it off, or with this very visible purchase of Oculus Rift?
I think the Oculus Rift did a great job of suddenly making people say, "Hey, let's take a look at that. Is this the time?" And when you combine that with the fact that there's several billion cell phones out in the world, and they quickly showed with Samsung that you could do a really satisfying VR experience with a cell phone, that's suddenly when people realize, hey, we might even be able to make some money.
And I guess to create Google Cardboard, which has been distributed by the hundreds of thousands already.
Yeah.
To turn a cell phone into a handheld, very cheap, but very powerful VR device, which everybody can get. Question from Sean. Hey, Eric. What are the main challenges when working on a VR animation that you and your team wouldn't necessarily have encountered when you worked on a traditional animation project?
I think it's kind of what we just talked about. You know, it's about the fact that the viewer is free to look anywhere they want. If you've got a higher-end headset, they can even walk around and explore the environment. So it's really how do you maintain their attention and their focus on the things that you'd like them to pay attention to and focus on, which is particularly important for storytelling.
Yeah, and I think we're going to discover a lot of stuff going forward.
Absolutely.
And very often the deep discoveries are made in the decades to come for these new media.
Right, it's probably some 12-year-old kid out there who will grow up with virtual reality that will actually, you know, transcend anything anybody's thought of and change the world.
Yeah, I can't wait to have also like multiplayer games in VR where we have joint experiences. Marina asked a question. We have a lot of people we teach programming here, and sometimes there's a bit of a confusion. What does it mean to go to Pixar, Industrial Magic, or DreamWorks, be surrounded by creatives, and how do they work? So the question is, what is the role of a programmer in an animation company? Is it entirely technical, or can it be artistic? And what qualifications should a person have, say, to join Baobab?
Well, I think the best work environment in an artistic/technical field is one where there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of communication, and you know, programming is a very creative job, I think, in on many applications, but understanding what is needed creatively from the non-programmers, and for the non-programmers to understand what the programmers are talking about, what they explain they're capable of doing and how they might do it.
So you get these like dorks that sit in the corner and program, and these like incredibly creative, fancily dressed, but how do you bring that together?
Well, I do think that programmers are creative.
Not a stereotype here.
Yeah, no, I think programmers are creative, and they should be creative. And the best programmers are creative. They can look at a creative problem and come back with a programming solution that will help the artists achieve what they need to do. And I shouldn't even say the artists, because I think the programmers, at least in our field, the more artistic they are, the better. And the more the artists are versed in technology, the better, because then that way we're speaking more closely the same language. And so for me to be able to talk to a programmer about an algorithmic progression or a geometric progression in terms of how something's working in the program is really helpful, that I can talk that way to them, just as it's helpful that they can talk to me about what it is we're looking for creatively, and actually understand why a lion's, say, body needs to deform a certain way, and perhaps understand a little bit about the anatomy of the character and how that might apply to how they might set the technical setup of the character to work. So,
what is the ratio of creatives and software people in your company?
It's probably about half and half.
Half and half, okay, so that's pretty good. And they sit in the same offices. That's pretty impressive.
Right, and it's great because, you buy off-the-shelf software where all the technicians and programmers are somebody else, and what do you do if it's not working? But, I kind of, started out at PDI, which was all in-house software. So I knew, like, Sean was the guy that wrote this program, and I could walk over 3 cubicles and go, Sean, this thing isn't working. And he'd come over and sit down and go, oh, I know what's wrong. And then he'd go back, and then 30 minutes later, he'd go, try it now. And
these days they go to Slack and type, and it's not working. And the other person might be somewhere on the planet, possibly sleeping.
There's a lot of Slack going around the office, and I'm thinking, you're right over there. You could just turn your head and talk to me. Whatever works.
Sometimes I want to build the intelligent Slack chatbot, so just keep my Slack account free. Rondell asked a personal question. What started your passion for creating animated movies, and how long did it take you to perfect the skills you have now to create and direct real movies?
Well, I haven't perfected it.
Well,
I never will.
Let's say if you haven't, then no one has, and define your level, the level of your perfection.
Well, I started making films actually as a kid. Never thought of it. I'd never even entered my mind that I could do it as a living. And then when I went to college, I started taking classes in a film school and was really inspired by this filmmaker named Stan Brakhage, who has passed away, but he's a famous avant-garde filmmaker of the 20th century, and got me onto my own filmmaking stuff. And so I was seriously trying to make films, although many of those were very bad films, starting around 1981 or so. And so it took me another 15 years before anybody offered me a job to direct a feature film. And in that time, like I said, I made a lot of bad films. I made some okay films. I made some films that I'm proud of. But the only way, I think, to really make it in this world, particularly as an artist, is to do art, you know? And you got to do it. And if you have a great idea and you don't do it, then you're not an artist.
Is this something that every filmmaker has to go through the 15 years of mediocre movies to finally arrive at the point where you get this perfect touch, or is it something that could be passed on much faster?
I think everybody's different. I think it's
so you have to find your own sweet spot.
I mean, there's people that make amazing films, in their 20s, like Orson Welles, for example. Right. and there's That's people true. That make amazing films. The best film they ever make is their first film. And some people would say that of Orson Welles. I actually happen to love a lot of the other films that he made in his career. But everybody's different. And for me, I think it just took a lot of maturation and a lot of stuff that just didn't come naturally to me, that I had to learn. But however long it takes, you will never get there if you don't start going.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
You can't win a race if you don't start.
That's true.
So I always encourage people to just go and do it. Go to your studio and make stuff. And
the nice thing is cameras are cheap now, and the equipment is not cheaper than it used to be.
When I was doing it, all you had was film, and that actually worked well for me, because that meant every time you pull the trigger when you're shooting motion picture film, it's like dollar signs just go in front of you.
I remember when I was a kid, I had a little camera, and every time I clicked it was $1.
Yeah, right. So you have to really think about what it is you're shooting. And it's almost, I found that when video came out, it actually almost made it more difficult to make film, because your tendency is just to go shoot everything all day long, and then you've got 10 hours of footage, and you're trying to make a 5-minute film, and what do I do with all this?
I had a friend who had 50,000 point-and-shoot pictures of his daughter and never looked at any. So I
confess I've got a drawer full of videos of my kids, and I haven't looked at them either. And now that I don't even have a device that will play those videos back.
Interesting.
So I've got to ship them off somewhere and pay somebody a bunch of money.
We are at the innovation center of the world in Silicon Valley, undoubtedly, and it's not the only one, but it's probably the most known one. And we had people like AstroTeller come visit and talk to me at the same stage. Eduardo asked a question about innovation, and he wants to know, as a leader, Eric, how can you promote a constantly innovative environment in your team?
How do you do this?
I think the best way is to allow people to participate at every level. Even Walt Disney said this, when he had a story meeting, everybody was invited, including his secretary, because he believed that a great idea can come from anybody. And so if you have an environment where people feel free to communicate, not only with their peers, but with the CEO, and where even the person that's stocking the refrigerator is a part of this team and feels accepted and feels inside, and if that person is confident enough to raise their hand and say, what if you did it this way? Then you've got an environment that I think empowers and engenders innovation, because everybody feels like they have permission.
That's great. Does that scale to larger organizations, or is there a break point at some point? Because you've been a member of both.
It's, I don't have a lot of experience. I have one experience, and that was at PDI. When I got there was about 30 people, and then we grew into a team of several hundred people. And there's no doubt that the environment and the tone of the place changed. Kind of like, you can almost see it, like you hit 75 people, and then something switches, and suddenly there's not all those connections, because it's just impossible. And I don't have a solution for that. I think I'll discover myself with Baobab as we hopefully continue to grow and add people. But it definitely changes the equation.
Kelly wants to know, what is your favorite movie and why?
Well, I have a lot of favorite movies, but I think one
Other
of the ones,
than your own, of course.
Yeah, not my own. But one that I never tire of watching is a film by Norman McLaren, who worked for the National Film Board of Canada. I think it was done in the 50s, early 60s, and it's called Begone Dull Care. And it's a direct animated film, so that means he's taken the strip of clear leader with the sprocket holes in it and painted directly onto the film. And it's done to an Oscar Peterson jazz tune, and it's just remarkable. And it's beautiful, and it's mesmerizing, and I try to watch it at least a couple times a year.
Nice.
And you can find it online.
I would love to watch
It's
it.
on. You can find it on YouTube.
Great hint.
Yeah, Begone Dull Care.
William wants to know, what is the most challenging thing for a director when directing a movie?
Well, it's always story. It's always story.
So it's the same.
Yeah, 95% of what I was doing at DreamWorks was story. It doesn't matter how pretty the picture is if you have a bad story. People will get bored. It doesn't matter how cool the technology is if you don't have people want something deeper ultimately. Like right now in VR, there's a lot of tech demos out there, look and see what we can do. It's cool. This is amazing. We can do this. We can put you on a roller coaster. We can do anything you can imagine. But there's very few pieces of content out there that actually give you a beginning and a middle and an end, and give you something that actually transcends what you can do and shows you something that you maybe couldn't imagine, and then suddenly you see like something beyond the medium itself.
Do you think these TV series that are very popular now, Game of Thrones and House of Cards, that medium will make it into VR, like the weekly 1 hour long?
I think there's a lot better chance of that happening than with computer animation, because it's a lot easier to get a VR live action camera and set up some performance than it is to create a computer animated piece. The difference is that with computer animation, because we have all the other hooks into things, we can make it very interactive. And with a live action piece, aside from sort of splitting storylines, there's not a lot you can do with interactivity. It's sort of like what you shoot is what you get.
I see.
But I think we're going to see a lot of live action VR serials coming.
Josh wants to know whether the computer graphics part is harder in VR than in regular animation.
It is harder.
And why?
Because you don't have you only have 11 milliseconds. Like, we might take 2 days to render a frame on Madagascar, and now we have 11 milliseconds. So
it's a lot of frames.
It's hard to deliver the same quality in a really short amount of time. It's harder because you have to have something in a 360-degree world, whereas you can very explicitly decide what's going to be within that rectangle of cinematic experience, and the list just goes on and on. But a lot of it is just pumping all that data through that tiny little pipe that you typically have with a phone. And even with the Oculus headset or the Vive headset, you still have to be careful. You know, you can't have an infinite number of lights. You can't have an infinite number of polygons. You know, fur is really, it reminds me of the days when I got involved in computers in the late 80s, early 90s, when it's like, hey, we've got a job to do fur. How do we do fur? I have no idea.
Flames, smoke.
Flames. Things that we take for granted in real life, like clouds and water, are really difficult.
Yeah.
Always, and especially so when you have to do it in 11 milliseconds.
Minecraft blocks are so much easier to run.
Exactly, right.
They went on the phone.
And it's a lesson that Minecraft can still be very compelling in that context. Yeah.
Yes. So can Pokemon Go, apparently.
I don't know about that, but it sounds like
Have you played it?
No. I just watched a video, though, of somebody running into the back of a parked police car while they were playing, you know, in their car while they were playing Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
He got out and he goes, it's just because of this dumb game.
That's funny. Interesting lawsuits coming up.
Yeah.
I want to close with a student question from an anonymous student. It's anonymous. And he says, or she says, did you learn anything or everything from a top-notch school? Or did you just learn by try and error on your own account?
I learned a great deal from my undergraduate experience, and I learned a great deal from CalArts as well. It's a great opportunity to really focus yourself. But to be a filmmaker, and in particular to be a director, you have to go through the world with an open mind and open eyes. And just like I said, it's important to be able to talk the language of a programmer. You know, for me, I need to be able to talk the language of music with the composer, and I need to be able to talk to the animators about acting. I need to be able to talk to the voice actors about their performance.
So that's really
I need to talk to the artists about. So it's kind of like one of those things where you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, and you try to surround yourself with people that are better at what they do than you could ever be. And that's the secret key to success, is to find somebody that's more ambitious than you and become their partner.
I see. And don't learn math, but just find someone who can do math for you.
Well, that's part of how it happens, you know? There's
true.
always out there, somebody's going to be better than you.
You have many tens of thousands of maybe even more students watching us around the world. Many of them are ambitious to come to Silicon Valley. What is your wisdom, word of wisdom for people that are young, that are exploring the world? What would you tell them?
Well, I think that, you know, the world is always changing, and anybody that gets kind of to my age and beyond will always say, well, in my day, but it is a real reality, and the best way to navigate that is not to necessarily think that every single detail of your life has to be planned out, or that you have to make the right choice every step of the way. The best thing is, you know, is Joseph Campbell says, is like, just follow your bliss. Find the things that are most exciting and interesting to you, because then you're going to do your best work and you're going to learn the most because you care. and then you might be shooting for this door at the end of the hallway, and then suddenly you won't even expect it, and this door over here will open up and they'll go, hey, you, get in here, and they'll drag you in, and suddenly you'll be doing something really exciting that involves all of these skills that you've been developing in your life because you've been developing from a place of passion.
That is such great advice. Eric, I want to thank you for coming. It's been an amazing pleasure. I'm looking forward to the release tomorrow. I'm your first customer, but I've been a fan of your work for a long time. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.
I want to tell our audience, this was our fourth talk. We have a fifth talk coming up, I think, on August 25th. We have Anand Rajamaran, who is a serial entrepreneur and known for great data science, a technical person, come to us, and have the pleasure of interviewing him. And so far, goodbye for Udacity Talks.